What's up, everybody out there in YouTube land? Wrath2501 here. Okay, guys, so got an interesting looking video. Alright, so this is What If Pokemon Were Superheroes by Popcross Studios. Okay, so this seemed really interesting. So I like the superhero ones he does because I love the stories he puts with them. So let's get started here and go.
Just a fun little fact about me. I didn't realize that Ash Ketchum's name was Ketchum because he wanted to catch them all until I was like 20 years old or so.
Dude, seriously?
Which is maybe a little bit embarrassing for me, but also if anyone else out there hadn't had that realization yet, you're welcome for having your mind blown. But anyway, we are finally there.
I like the Christmas characters over there, too.
Thank you so much, everybody, and I promised back in April that once Popcross Studios hit that number, I would be rebooting Pokemon as Superheroes. One of the first series I ever did on this channel.
Oh.
Back when I did it, I was drawing the characters significantly faster. My art has improved a lot since, and possibly most importantly, I didn't do
good back then,
stories
too.
back when I started that series originally. Now that's become a very important part of this channel. So now Pokemon as Superheroes is back with a story that I've been thinking about for a good long while now, and let's see what I can do with this concept 4 years later, shall we? Let's go. Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. Ash Assemblum was growing more and more tired of the trend of hero suppression that had gone on over the last 8 years. When he was growing up, superpowered heroes were everywhere, saving lives and helping those in need with their incredible abilities. Ash had no powers himself, but spent years in school for superhero relations and metaphysio control, planning to one day be the trainer to the greatest team of superheroes on the planet. But every law that President Giovanni passed made that dream less and less likely.
Oh my god.
Sure, there were plenty of villains running rampant prior to his election, but all the precautions put in place by the Giovanni government hadn't really made that much better, despite what they'd have people believe.
Yeah.
When Giovanni was
like
first elected president of Kanto, he swore to make the country safer by implementing laws specific to superpowered individuals. It was the platform he was elected on, and many believed this was a necessary thing to do. Even Ash believed it was a good idea at first. But over his first 4 years, Giovanni slowly implemented more and more rules that made it nearly impossible for any hero to protect people unless they officially registered to work as a paid hero for Giovanni's newly implemented police, the Rocket Force. Ash quickly saw the harm that Giovanni's laws were doing to the hero community, and he thought others did too. But to his shock, Giovanni was then elected again and continued to put in place even stricter laws that essentially made any hero an outlaw if they used their powers for an unregistered use. To try and distract people from this, he created a government-run hero fighting league to give empowered people an outlet to use their abilities in, which had become massively successful and, unfortunately, was making people further ignore that crime was far from on a decline. The Giovanni government was notoriously corrupt and was consistently taking money from security businesses that were now thriving with heroes unable to do their work as freely as they once had. When Giovanni was elected for a third term as Kanto's president, he was on track to get many other world leaders to implement his same laws, and Ash finally hit his breaking point. Regardless of what was legal, he was going to build his superhero team. A team to hopefully even expose Giovanni's corruption and restore the world of heroes to its former glory. And Ash knew the perfect person to go to first. An old friend of his mother's who'd first gotten Ash into the idea of hero training was a man named Dr. Yukinari Oak. He'd aided hundreds of the world's most famous heroes, and despite having retired, still had many connections, and luckily was willing to help, even provide some funding.
I think it's interesting because he's drawing
there were
the superhero Pikachu young, because Pikachu is the unevolved form.
He strongly believed would be more than eager to help.
He's like the middle form, so it's like he's like a teenager, so that's actually very clever.
They'd all finally caved and taken positions under the government's Rocket Force. Oak did have one heartily endorsed hero to suggest, however. One Ash had indeed heard of, though knew had never truly been a team player.
Pikachu!
Sparkstreak, known more so now by her civilian name, Raya Chu, had been a world-famous hero with electricity powers and super speed, but had been totally out of the public eye for years. Oak told Ash that she'd moved to Alola to raise her children. She'd done some hero work there under a new identity, but eventually hung up the heroing life. Even still, she adamantly despised what Giovanni was doing to Kanto and its heroes. Ash immediately set off to Alola, eager to meet Raya in person. Oak had given him the address, and Ash found her in a nice, somewhat isolated home with a huge yard. He told her what he had in mind, that he was going to assemble a team to remind the world that being a hero means standing up to any foe no matter how much power and influence they have. She appreciated the idea and fully backed him in this venture, but wasn't willing to go herself. She had 4 kids who needed her here.
Oh.
Or at least 3 of them still did. She then called in her son, Pico, claiming he could be a perfect fit for this team.
Nice.
Ash remembered the young man from his brief stint as his mother's kid sidekick just before Giovanni's government had taken over. Pico, too, had great disdain for Giovanni, as he'd always wanted to grow up to be a great hero of Kanto. And while he was very skeptical about working with a trainer like Ash, he did like the idea of bringing Giovanni down. And so, while it wasn't the hero Ash had originally wanted, he finally had his first recruit.
Nice that he had to put all that there just to do the intro and stuff. Man, he does some good world building with this shit.
Ash spent a week at Raya's home getting to know and starting to train Pico.
Alola.
Or at least, trying to.
Sand
Unfortunately,
Slash?
Pico
Which is
wasn't
weird 'cause of
very
the ice.
eager to listen. He thought only people with
Isn't that the
powers
Alola
should
Sand
train
Slash, or is that a
heroes and
completely
didn't
different
heed
Pokemon?
much of Ash's advice. Ash knew it was going to take some work to break through Pico's defenses, but Raya assured him it would be worth the effort. The boy had massive potential as a hero. To further help in their venture, Raya gave Ash an encrypted phone that she called her Hero Dex. On it was contact information of dozens of heroes, and even some villains she'd met back in her heroing days, both in and out of Kanto. Ash was massively grateful, and he and Pico were about to set off when she gave one final suggestion.
The Sonic the
In
Hedgehog thing
Alola,
with that.
Raya had a close
just give her a
friend named
ponytail.
Sasha, who
Good
had
idea.
powers herself, and was actually the sister of a once great hero from Kanto named Desert Claw. Ash and Pico eagerly went to her home first to talk to her, but when they approached her home, they found it was surrounded by a masked gang of crooks that Ash actually recognized. They were a group that had been started back in Kanto called Fear Row, known for their wingsuits and erratic, violent demeanor. Ash had heard they had cells in other parts of the world, but had never seen them himself. They were trashing the outside of Sasha's home, but she was nowhere to be seen. Ash gave Pico a bunch of ideas about how to approach this fight, but Pico had no interest in taking orders and just ran in, attacking as he pleased. He fired bolts of lightning, striking gang members, and super sprinting into them, tackling them across the yard, hurling some through Sasha's windows, doing even more damage to her home.
Dumbass.
Worse still, Pico wasn't paying attention to where all the members were, and some managed to sneak up behind him. They nailed him right in the back, and a few jumped on top of him, knocking him to the ground. They were all wailing on him, and Pico was building up an electric blast to fire them all off, but before he could, to his shock, Ash ran in and punched one of the members attacking him in the head. Some then turned on Ash and started beating him, and with no powers to protect him, there was little Ash could do. Even still, Ash kept trying to run in and get the others off Pico. Pico was astounded
Just like
by
the
his
series.
bravery,
Nice.
though he also somewhat considered it stupidity. Pico yelled out and fired an eruption of built-up lightning that sent gang members soaring off him, scattering them across the yard, twitching and writhing from the shock. He then ran over to Ash and struck away the ones kicking him in the dirt. Pico thanked Ash for trying and helped him up. But this fight wasn't over. The gang was quickly back on their feet, and Pico finally allowed Ash to give him some suggestions. But luckily, they were quickly aided by an even bigger assist, as an icy hero with clawed hands ran onto the scene. This was Sasha, who a week earlier had busted up a massive hideout of Fear Row, so wasn't surprised to see them trashing her home. Pico and Sasha worked side by side, with Ash calling out moves from the sidelines. Pico found he was much more efficiently taking down gang members by listening to Ash, though Sasha was besting the majority of them herself. She could fire beams of ice and shoot frozen daggers out of her body at incredible speeds. Within minutes, the entire gang was either unconscious or frozen in place. Sasha graciously thanked Pico and Ash for their help. They gave her a hand cleaning up her yard while they told her their plans to take down Giovanni and show Kanto what heroes were made of again. She was sympathetic to their cause, but ultimately unwilling to help. As they could see, there were clearly still many villains in Alola that needed thwarting, and Sasha already had her work cut
Oh my
out
god, they
for
got
her.
that creepy
Worse
ass
news still, her
sandcastle?
hero
That would be
brother, Desert Claw,
disturbing.
had done
That's a
some
disturbing ass
vigilante work
Pokemon.
in Kanto, having been unwilling to register with the Rocket Force, and he'd been arrested for it. He was currently serving his 4th of 6 months in prison. Ash was disheartened by the news, but also made that much more determined to fix things in Kanto. Better still, this whole ordeal had finally given Pico some respect for his trainer. Together with their new friendship properly budding, they set off for another country, Johto, where they sought a hero Ash had always wanted to meet.
The Johto League.
In Raya's Hero Dex was the contact information for the renowned Johtoan hero Aquajaw.
That's a
He
cool
was
name
a
for
burly
that
hero known
Pokemon,
for
too.
having a bite that could tear through steel.
Yeah.
He was a predominantly water-based hero and could hold his breath for hours at a time,
Pause
but
on
was
that.
still a big threat to villains on land. He had enhanced strength, could spit cannons of stored water, and had an extra durable supersuit that made him incredibly difficult to injure. He was also publicly open about his disdain for how things in Kanto were being handled over the last few years.
Okay.
But had gotten quiet about this as he embraced the fighting leagues, started by Giovanni, that had expanded into Johto.
Hypocrite.
He'd had to publicly reveal his identity as Ferris
That's stupid.
Gartson to be allowed to participate,
Gartson,
but willingly
really?
did so as he thrived in the competition and claimed it was perfect training for his Johto-based hero work. He was a hard man to get close to since becoming a sporting celebrity, but Ash and Pico were eventually able to get him one-on-one and tell him what they had in mind. Pico was skeptical that a star like Ferris would be willing to help them, but to their shock, he was instantly fully on
Really?
board. He said he'd hated staying quiet, but didn't want to be kicked out of the league for bad-mouthing Giovanni. Still, he had a niece that looked up to him, and he wanted to show her that he was a mighty enough hero to even take on a whole country if he had to. Ash got a slight sense that Ferris really just wanted bigger and bigger fights to take on, but regardless, they finally had a second member of their team, and a heavy hitter with a big audience at that. Ferris was gung-ho to just start blasting info about their budding team across his social platforms, but Ash fought to keep him quiet until they'd made some kind of big, public, heroic act. Aquajaw was tough to rein in, but he grudgingly agreed. For a few days,
Oh,
that
God.
is. Ash claimed they needed a team of at least 6 before they could start going public, and had plenty of ideas about who they could approach next. Ash wanted to head back to Kanto, claiming they needed more Kanto-based heroes from the old days to get the more patriotic demographic on board with their mission.
That's pretty
but
smart.
first, Ferris had to finish the currently running Johto Fighting League tournament. He was down to the grand finale, and if he won, or when he won, as Ferris put it, he'd have that much bigger of a platform from which to get their team's mission out there. Plus, when the tournament was over, his off-season would begin, and he'd have the time to properly put into the group. Ash and Pico agreed to stay, and were given front row seats to watch the fight. The contestant he was up against was a brand new fighter that had come out of nowhere in the Paldea fighting scene and shocked the world with her skills. After watching some of the footage from her prior fights, Ash wasn't even fully convinced that Ferris could take her. Sarah Edgelin wasn't an opponent you wanted to underestimate.
Okay. That's who's coming up next?
Before the big fight, Ash had done what research he could into Sarah Edgelin to see what he could learn that might help Ferris. The Paldean fighter had never worked as a superhero. Her mother had died in the line of work as a hero, and Sarah still somewhat resented her for that.
Shit.
Sarah had taken on elements of her mother's hero attire to show some respect to the fallen protector, publicly known as Ghost Saber,
Oh,
but
that's a
really
cool
she
name.
just wanted the name recognition to get an early spotlight on her when she was in the lower Paldean leagues. Her powers heavily revolved around fire and dark magic. She
Fire,
had a
dark type.
lean and agile armor
Looks
that
like a
spawned
steel type,
flaming
though.
blades from her forearms, and had inscriptions carved into it that allowed her to use ghostly projectile
Or
attacks
ghost
to
type.
distract
I don't know.
her opponents
I don't know
while
that
she got
Pokemon.
into close combat with them. She'd then do her best to stay close, hitting however she had to finish the fight quickly. When she and Ferris stepped out into the arena, surrounded by thousands of cheering fans, Ash was still anxious about the battle. He'd given Ferris some pointers that the famous fighter surprisingly took into consideration, but Ash still wasn't sure if Ferris would be able to handle Sarah's speed and unpredictability as a relatively new fighter to the scene. The fight began with Aquajaw immediately diving for the watery moat around the arena. He darted through it, leaping out and shooting cannons of water before diving back in. He assumed Ghost Saber would want to avoid the water, as her abilities were heavily fire-based. But, to his shock, she was more than willing to charge in after him. She dodged all his attacks and leapt right at him the next time he dove out of the water. She smacked him across the head with the face of her blade to disorient him, then grabbed him and hurled him back into the arena. Her foot struck the wall just above the moat, and she sprung off it, never even touching the water. She darted towards Aquajaw again, and he snapped his mouth at her arm as she swung for his head. He bit right down onto her blade and snapped through it, sending purple, flaming metal across the arena. She barely seemed to notice, though, as she dodged around him, and from her now bare arm sprung forth a shadowy claw, with which she slashed him across the back. It didn't appear to break the suit, but Ash could tell the strike had phased through and hit Ferris's back. He stumbled forward in pain as she continued to leap and spring around him, slashing blow after blow into him. It wasn't looking good for Ferris, when he suddenly started implementing a suggestion Ash had given. Ferris wasn't known for his speed on land, but his incredibly powerful legs gave him low-tier super speed, which he hadn't used in any fights thus far. That made it a perfect curveball. He got away from Sarah and started sprinting around the arena, not heading for the water, but darting all about with no clear objective. She was very thrown off by his movements, but started after him, easily able to keep pace. He then ran straight for the moat, as if about to dive in. Instead of diving, though, he feigned a leap and drove his arm into the ground to instantly halt his run.
Oh.
He whipped around just as she crashed into him, and he drove his jaw right into her shoulder. He then slammed her all around like a ragdoll, while using his arm to tear away pieces of her armor.
That's pretty
Finally,
brutal.
he hurled her into the moat wall. She slammed against the wall and flopped into the water. She floated to the surface face up, revealing she was completely knocked out. Aquajaw had won. Ash, Pico, and the entire crowd cheered. Ash was initially very excited, knowing this could be very good publicity for them eventually, though he had not wanted that publicity to come so soon. Ferris was given a mic and asked to say a few words on the winner's podium, and with millions of people watching all around the world, the boisterous hero couldn't resist blurting out what he was up to next. He boasted that he was teaming up with a group of incredible heroes to go protect the civilians of Kanto from the many villains still running amok, and if President Giovanni wanted to stop them, he'd have to send every Rocket Force agent he had, because this team was going to be unstoppable.
Oh god.
Ash buried his head in his hands, knowing that far before he was ready, the entire planet was going to be watching their every move now. Still, he knew they had the initial makings of a great team. He had to stay determined and confident. The people of Kanto and the entire world needed this team to work, and with his two allies, Raya's contacts, and Oak's financial backing, Ash knew they could do this. Ash was still set to assemble the greatest team of heroes the world had ever seen, and in spirit assemble all the heroes of the world, to remind people why it needed
So it looks like there'll be more episodes of this.
Of Giovanni's shackles.
That's a pretty cool design.
Hopefully it's very noticeable that I really put my all into this episode, and I am super happy with how it all came together. And of course, it's really fun looking back on the original Pokemon as Superheroes episode and comparing the old Pikachu with the new one. Plus, there is so much room for more stories set in this universe. I could do tournament-focused episodes and super villain episodes, which is actually what I'm thinking of doing next. So if you have any good suggestions for
Gengar's
Pokemon
excellent villain fodder, that's for damn sure. That mofo, pure evil.
And of course, if you're new to the channel and you want more Pokemon stuff or superhero stuff, you might want to check out my Pokemon as SCPs series or something a little bit creepier, or just my best superheroes episode playlist, because I've got lots of superhero episodes on here, and I'd say that playlist has some of my best storytelling and art in it. Anyway, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. The thought I want to leave people with today is one I might have actually used in the past, but I think it's a really good idea. To stop using the phrase, "I don't have time," and replace it with, "That's not a priority." or I'm not
That
making the
that
time
sounds
for
very
that.
politician
I realize
to me,
personally
you
that
know?
when I say I don't have time for something, I am giving up all my power in
It's
that
not my
situation.
priority.
And it's often not actually true. What I really mean is I'm prioritizing something else in that time. So rephrasing it that way gives you some power back and helps you realize whether or not you actually should be prioritizing the thing that you're saying you don't have time for. I hope that's inspiring or useful to
Mostly
someone
just
out there. Thank
confusing.
you so much for watching, everybody. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.
Okay, well, hope you guys enjoyed that. I did. That was interesting. I do like the superhero ones, because of the stories he builds around them, and hope you guys enjoy it too. If you do, definitely click on the link to the original and like and subscribe over at Popcross. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to me before you go, guys. We're still trying to grow this channel up. Ever since we hit 100,000, the growth has really tapered off. I don't know if YouTube is like shadowing us or whatever, or people getting unsubscribed or something. I don't know. But, well, you know, make sure you're subscribed, guys. It's just clicking that button means a whole hell of a lot to me. I really appreciate it. I love all you guys. I love your suggestions and everything. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Tune in every day for new content. Bye-bye.